Well, folks, today I wanted to talk about a serious matter, and that is, are the kids of today zombies or weird or socially awkward? Or because I keep seeing comments. I just finished watching a YouTube video where some guy designed his basement to look like a retro blockbuster movie rental type of place. And people were commenting how it was so amazing growing up in the 80s and early 90s because kids were still kids. They weren't zombies looking at their phones all day long. And I think to me, the way I see modern kids and people of the future is that they're just a different species. Humans are basically, I feel like the kids that grew up in the 80s and early 90s, they were the last generations of classical humans. You know how we listen to classic music, stuff that Beethoven, Mozart, whoever, like the same kind of classical tunes you've heard for the last how many hundreds of years, right? You've heard the same kind of songs over and over. That was a certain period of time. That's what I feel like it is for humans. We've sort of ended the classical era. So in 500 years from now, when people look back, they'll think of us as the classical version of humans, because whatever it means to be a human is not the same anymore. Now you probably think, well, no, that's not true because people are still people. What are you talking about? Yeah, it looks like it. Superficially, we all still look the same. But the new generation of people, they're slowly turning into something else. Now, there's just small signs now, but soon what it's going to mean to be a human, it's going to be something completely different. If you really look at the future and you think what's going to be here okay, so let's say if you look back at humanity and you think, what was a person like 2,000 years ago, right? And you think, what is a person now? It's basically the same thing. There's really not much difference at all. But when you say, what's a person going to be like in 2,000 years from now? I guarantee you it's not going to be the same. If I went back 2,000 years ago, if I got in a time machine and I went 2,000 years ago and I spoke the exact same language, nobody would even really notice me. If I just went there, I would basically act the same. The way people acted 2,000 years ago, they went up to each other, they said hello, they were physical, they looked like us, and it was basically the same thing. But in 2,000 years from now, I don't even know how people will say hello to each other. I don't even know what the common greeting will be. Is it a hello? Is it sending a telepathic signal to your brain? Is it just like glowing? Do you just start glowing like a blue color? Like what happens? How do you say hello in 2,000 years from now? Really, that's like basically the title of the video. How do you say hello 2,000 years from now? It's pretty catchy. I like it. I just made it up now. But yeah. So whatever it's going to mean to be a human being. Now, see, it's funny because what's funny is that if you know that people 2,000 years ago were just people and now we're still just people, in your brain it's probably hard to think, why the hell would you think that in 2,000 years from now we're going to be anything different? Well, like I said, the kids who grew up in the 80s, early 90s, they're like the last generation of classical people. There's so many areas where it's just going to change what it means to be a human being. So let's see. Genetically, we're going to be able to probably just alter our genetics to have blue hair if we want, purple eyes. We can alter our genetics to be taller, shorter, to look any way we want, right? We've never had the ability to just change ourselves like an avatar however we like. That's pretty crazy, right? That's got to mean something different to be a human being. And then it's going to be how we communicate with technology, right? Are we going to be inside of technology? Because we've always been basically a physical version of ourselves, where like 2,000 years ago, I would physically go to your house, say hello, then we have some food, do whatever we want to do, and then call it a night. But even now, we're starting to like not say hello in person, right? So when we say hello to somebody, it doesn't have to be physically going to their house. So just imagine what it's going to be like 2,000 years from now. Everybody's going to be inside of your house in some sort of mental state. You know, that's the irony. I've talked about this a lot. And it's funny because I've talked this about a lot like over the last 10 years. And I think people kind of get that concept more now, which is the irony behind spirituality and technology. Because whether it happens spiritually or technologically, everything seems to always go back to oneness. Because in spirituality, you always hear about this idea that everything is one. We're all one. And what people call God is just like the collective consciousness of all that is. It's just like a one connected interweb kind of thing, right? Kind of like a brain. It's like this one thing. And it's kind of like all of existence is just one brain. It's all connected to each other, right? So when you hear about it spiritually, it kind of sounds like, if you're not connected with that stuff, kind of like, I don't know, it sounds kind of weird. We're all one. What does that even mean? But when you look at evolving, whether it's going to happen spiritually or technologically, we're all merging into one. That seems to be the universal constant to everything, where it's like everything is one. Kind of like the Big Bang. Everything was just this one single dot and it exploded into infinite pieces. And then eventually all those infinite pieces come back to one again. And it seems to be this never-ending infinite cycle of oneness, splitting up into a million pieces and then back to oneness. And it's like a heartbeat that just goes on for infinity. And it seems like no matter which way you go, it always goes back to the same cycle, right? So we're all separate, we live in different places of the world, and now we're all basically becoming one again. Now with the use of technology. So technology is really merging all of us into one being, right? Because if right now I have the technology to communicate with somebody across the world, see them, feel them, just like kind of, well, feel them for now sounds kind of weird, but if we develop technology where you can feel somebody that's not even in a room with you. And you probably think, well, that sounds kind of crazy, Tony. Come on. Well, think about this. Basically, any technology you can kind of think of with your mind, the only reason we don't have it now, today, is because we just haven't developed the technology to make it. But so anything you can really kind of conceive of, most likely eventually we'll discover the technology and how to use it. So when you think about what we're going to discover in the next 2,000 years, just think about how much we've discovered in the last 100 years, right? I mean, think about how much we've discovered in the last 100 years, and then think about the next 2,000 years. So this idea of connecting with somebody who's on the other side of the world and being able to touch them, feel them, smell them, whether this happens through some sort of virtual technology, whatever it is, it'll happen through some sort of technology, right? So then eventually all our thoughts, all our feelings, everything will just be connected with everybody. Again, going back to oneness. So it seems like whether it happens spiritually or technologically, it's always the same cycle of togetherness, separateness, right? It just always merges us back into one. So we always end up becoming one thing again. And so when I say the kids that grew up in the 80s, early 90s is like the last generation of classical kids, what it means to be a human being is that whatever it's going to mean to be a person is just going to be completely different in the next 2,000 years. I don't think it's going to be better or worse, but it's just going to be different. So when someone calls a kid like, "Oh, I'm glad that I grew up in the 80s, early 90s, because it was the last generation of kids that weren't zombies." Well, see, when you look at a younger person now staring at their phone all the time, they might look like a zombie, but what they're doing is that they're digesting so much information, such an insane amount. When you take a 10-year-old kid of today and compare them to a 10-year-old kid of the 1980s, it's not even the same person anymore. I mean, it's incredible what a 10-year-old kid can do now because they have so much knowledge. A 10-year-old kid now, if they started watching YouTube from the time they were born, they can be a plumber, they can be an expert musician, they can build houses. They've developed enough knowledge to be able to do almost anything. It's kind of insane how much data and how much information a 10-year-old can learn. It's insane. So they have so much information that the reason they look like zombies is because we as human beings kind of have two states. One when we're digesting and the other one when we're creating. So when you look at everything that's available, you have to ask yourself, see, a kid during the 1980s, they were creating more than they were digesting, right? Because you had to figure out clever ways to amuse yourself and keep yourself busy and sort of entertain yourself. But now, if you just stare at a screen watching YouTube or whatever, you're digesting information. So it's like another way to look at it is that, do you produce content or do you consume content? Because that's sort of like a trendy way to say it now, because that's really what we're about right now, right? People are either producing content or watching content. So you have to ask yourself, how much content does a 10-year-old produce, and how much content does a 10-year-old consume? So, of course, they look like zombies because they're consuming so much content. But also because of that, they're becoming so technically smart because they know so much about so many different things that a 10-year-old from the 1980s would never be able to know. So the future version of us is going to be obviously very different, but it's obviously also going to be a lot more capable because just the way it means to be separate, what happens when you merge back into oneness with technology or whatever it is, you're merging all that information too. So when everyone's connected, everyone's sharing information. And really, it's all about information. Everything is basically just information. You ask, like, why does someone know more than the other person? Because they have the information. So now we have such easy access to information that if you're a 10-year-old kid, you can learn to be a plumber because you've never worked at the job. But if you watch a YouTube video by some guy who's been a plumber for 30 years, you learn all his information. Or if you're a 10-year-old and you want to learn how to play the piano, you can just watch a master piano player teach you and play all these songs, and you learn from them, and now you have the information. So what's going to happen is that you just basically, all the information is linked now. So you have the information of like millions and billions of people all merged into one. But yeah, so the whole idea of like kids being zombies now, yeah, it looks like that now because that's just because they're consuming so much data. But like I said, they're different. We're becoming a different thing. We're moving away from being a classical human being. The way we're going to be able to, whatever we're going to be with genetics, altering our genetics and living in this virtual field of information and being connected to everybody, that's not a classical human anymore. But I just don't think it's a matter of one of them being good and one of them being bad. It's just different. Everything evolves eventually. See, the thing is, we've been the same for so long that we kind of thought that we were sort of like, that's what we are. That's what it means to be a human. But there's no such thing as what it means to be a human. It's just what stage you're at, you know? It's kind of like saying what it means to be a computer. Well, what it means to be a computer in the 19, whatever you want to say it, to what it means now. You know, a computer now or whatever is in your pocket. Computer used to be like in a whole warehouse or a whole room. Like you would have a giant room and that was the computer. Now it's just like something you put in your pocket. What's a computer going to be like in 2,000 years? Not even going to be in your pocket. It's going to be just like a little microscopic chip in your body, if you even still have a body. So everything changes. And but it was fun. Basically what I'm trying to say is that what it meant to be a classical human being, because you have to understand, we weren't always a classical human being. What were we before we were a classical human being? Some people say we were apes. Some people say we were apes and then aliens came down and they put their DNA. It doesn't really matter what it was. The point is that we were different, right? I mean, clearly everything was different if everything started off with a single-celled organism and then just multiplied and evolved into what we are now, right? It doesn't matter how that evolution happened or if it was sped up by some alien beings that came, because you have to understand, if an alien being came and shared their DNA with us and mixed it with whatever ape-like creature we were, that's sort of irrelevant. It doesn't really matter if that happened or not because we would have evolved into something else anyways. They just kind of sped up the process, right? Everything naturally evolves and changes, so that part is really irrelevant to anything. The point is, whatever it meant to be a human being for the last how many thousands of years, that's ending. And now we're going to be like person 2.0 or 3.0, however many stages we've gone to. But yeah, the irony is that a 10-year-old kid now still looks like a 10-year-old kid. Like if you saw a 10-year-old kid now compared to the one in the 1980s, they look the same, but they're going in a completely different direction. So yeah, what is it going to be like to say hello in 2,000 years? And how do you say hello in 2,000 years? I'm still naming it that, the video. But yeah, the classical human is gone. And this is the beginning stage of the next level of what it means to be what we are. And yeah, that's basically it. That was my video for today. Take care. Bye.